All right, welcome to the Risk Reversal Podcast. I am Dan Nathan. I am joined by Daniel Schreiber. He is the CEO and co-founder of Lemonade. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you.
All right, this is a story that I knew about. This was like one of the COVID darlings. You guys went public in the summer of 2020. I mean, I can't imagine. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a public market CEO at a time where it just seemed the whole world, not just the investment world, was turned upside down. But a good friend of mine, Steve On, who is an investor in your company, we were at an idea dinner, one of those old school Wall Street idea dinners, and everyone's talking about, this was earlier this year, AI infrastructure. Really, the only thing in town, right, that anyone cares about in the stock market. And Steve's like, well, I got one for you. It's a little bit under the radar. And he says lemonade. And we're like, no, we already have our drink. No, and he said, no, lemonade. That's cheesy. I know, I get it. All right, we're going to get to all that. But Daniel, got to hear a little bit about your backstory. Pretty interesting. You didn't start as a technology entrepreneur. It sounds like you started with a law degree and maybe practicing a little bit, but let's hear that backstory. We're definitely going to get to the founding story and everything all about Lemonade, but love to hear a little bit about where you come from and what you were doing.
Sure. Well, the remnants of the English accent will tell you that I'm from London originally. And yeah, I finished high school and went and did a law degree in London, King's College London, graduated, became an attorney and lasted 9 months in the job. Wow. So I'm a recovering attorney. I've been clean for almost 30 years. Nice. And really, it was the mid-90s, I guess 96, 97 really. And in those days, if you had zero experience, that was a perfect qualification for raising a round from VCs. And it was the dot-com bubble was kind of taking off. So I started my first startup. And really, I've been in entrepreneurship ever since. So since the 90s, and most recently, 10 years ago, founded Lemonade together with Shai Wininger, who'd founded Fiverr. He's a deep technologist and an outstanding product guy. I'm more of a generalist, and we've been joined at the hip ever since.
Yeah, I want to stop there for 1 second because it's interesting you say that. I have two daughters in college, and they're at a college where a lot of people go and they get law degrees, by the way. But there's a lot of folks in there that are just captivated by this entrepreneurial environment, much similar to what was going on in the late 90s. I was in the market in the late 90s. And, I have kids come to me and they know that we cover these stocks in the public and the private markets. And they say something not always what you just admitted to. You said, I'm a generalist. You know what I mean? Now, you have other skill sets that you didn't speak to, but you partnered with somebody who is a technologist. Just give me 2 sentences that I can kind of forward to my kids or some of their friends on that. How important as an entrepreneur, knowing what you're good at and finding other people to partner with?
For me, it's been seminal. It's been absolutely cardinal. I founded my first company. I was in my 20s. And I had to surround myself with people who were better at every single thing than I was because I was good at nothing. I was straight out of 9 months of being a lawyer. I knew nothing about tech. So the only way I was going to succeed is by putting people in place who had greater domain expertise in every function than I did. And what I was reasonably good at and have got better at is having the vision thing and being able to set direction and being the conductor who kind of brings the orchestra together rather than being able to play any one instrument. So I think that's somewhat unusual. I think most tech entrepreneurs are technologists first and foremost, but it's worked pretty well for me.
All right, let's flash forward to 2015 when you founded Lemonade. One of the things that I've been reading and listening and talking a lot myself about the comparisons between what's going on now in and around generative AI and the optimism about the technology and all the build that's going to take and the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars to get us to the other side. And I think a lot of folks who want to compare it to what was the infrastructure build for the internet, there are some comparisons that are great. You had a front row seat for it. I did from an investment standpoint. But there's a lot of things that are very different. And again, maybe history's rhyming a little bit. But when I think about the 15 years from when you started your first company to starting Lemonade, the NASDAQ was so overextended. The valuations in both the public and the private markets were so overextended. It took the NASDAQ more than 10 years to get back to those prior highs. And I think that's one thing you don't hear people talk a lot about. But every once in a while, I'll hear that. Every once in a while, I'll repeat that. So you were a long-suffering, recovering lawyer, but then you were a startup founder. In 2015, let's talk about it because we were back, baby. Like the NASDAQ was back at the bubble highs. What was the impetus for starting Lemonade? Did you consider some other sort of industries? Why did you go after insurance first?
It wasn't self-evident. I knew nothing about insurance. My co-founder knew nothing about insurance other than the fact that we kind of consumers and we had high school probability theory, but that's about it. So it was not obvious. I did reach a stage. I'd just come off another job, a stint at another company, and I thought, I have another startup in me. I was in my mid-40s at the time. And I took some time out. In fact, I was on gardening leave, so I was forced to take time out, which is really excellent because it makes you take the perspective and take the time. And I started going, in retrospect, what sounds like a fairly methodologically kind of coherent way. At the time, it felt more like a meandering between different sectors and thinking everything that I've learned about direct-to-consumer marketing, about digital-first infrastructure, about exponential technologies, which industry is ripe for me bringing all of that to bear upon it, so to speak. And actually, I spend a lot of time in the medical arena. I was convinced then, I'm convinced still, that in not too many years' time, we'll look back at 2015's medicine like we do now at 17th century medicine. But I didn't like the competitive dynamics. IBM was big in there, Apple was big in there, Google was big in there. So I think the hypothesis is true, but I just didn't like the competitive dynamics. And I found myself at Singularity University out on the West Coast with Ray Kurzweil and all these guys. And Peter Diamandis, in the middle of one of his presentations, mentioned peer-to-peer insurance. And I was primed. I was looking at all these different sectors. And that kind of triggered me going down, looking at insurance, which is this grey, forgotten sector, 11% of GDP, 100% household penetration. It's one of the largest industries in the world, but so grey, so boring, so forgotten and overlooked. And he drew my attention to it. I went off, I did the work. I founded Lemonade with Shai, and then I met Peter. And I said to him, hey, Peter, I'm doing that thing you spoke about. Let's grab a coffee. And we sit down and I explained to him what we're doing. He says to me, I meant something totally different. I meant DNA sequencing for medical, blah, blah, blah. So I like to quip that Lemonade was one big misunderstanding. But that was the founding story, if you like.
I love that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the industry of insurance. Like, for instance, you had this idea, a lot of these huge companies, you just talked about 100%. Like, think about that, like penetration of American homes, and who knows what it's like in other places. I'll bet Europe is not too dissimilar. But when you were looking at the industry, though, were you saying, is this an industry that's going to look to kind of change from within, or are they going to kind of defend their moat a great deal? And I'm just curious if that was an important part of it, or you just thought your model was going to be so unique, at least speaking at first to a different demographic that they're used to serving? I
really loved our chances. I remember one of the early days I was meeting with some VCs, and they're like, hey, you don't know anything about insurance. Aren't you worried about AIG? And I said, geez, how do I be competing with Apple? And he said to me, aren't you worried about Apple? Something that I've done in a former life. Like, that is a valid question. That's a really formidable company. But the insurance companies are quite staid, very traditional, set in their ways, making money hand over fist. They're doing very, very well for themselves, but under no stress or pressure to change. And they don't have any of the dynamics or any of the capabilities that you really need to transform yourself. In fact, rarely does an incumbent really transform themselves. You'd struggle to think of 5 examples in the last 100 years of a huge technological wave coming and an incumbent the size of insurance companies managing to reinvent themselves organically. So I really like that dynamic. Insurance, as we started looking at it, we fast saw that it has 3 things that almost never come together. A staggeringly large industry, market size, TAM, deeply unloved. So, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But everyone hates the insurance company. So kind of large, unloved, and unchanged. 10% of the S&P 100 are insurance companies, and the average age is about 130 years old. These are companies that were founded during the horse-drawn carriage era, kind of the byproducts of the Industrial Revolution, and they've managed to ignore every revolution since. And you think that those things coming together, big, unloved, unchanged, and for an entrepreneur and investor, it's ding, ding, ding. That's kind of a holy trinity that just means dive in and see what you can do. Yeah, and so when you think about, okay, you were going after an industry that would not disrupt itself for the most part. That's probably one of the things you were betting on a little bit, and you just saw the TAM, as you just mentioned, and you didn't have to actually take that much market share to prove the concept and demonstrate that your model was a better mousetrap. Talk to us, okay, I get why mobile. At the time, if you were anything going on direct to consumer 10 years ago, you had to be mobile first for the most part, right? Why AI first? What did you see? And again, going back to your partner who was a technologist, what was so important about AI at the time? And did you call it something different back then? We called it AI. Okay. Our tagline was kind of an insurance company founded on AI. So we said that from the outset. In fact, my very first presentation to the board on the very, literally at the founding meeting was all about how we're going to use AI. So it was highly irregular at the time. At the moment, I almost feel sheepish mentioning AI because it sounds like yet another company trying to sprinkle some pixie dust on what they're doing. But no, this was really the founding hypothesis. And if you think about insurance, and this is where insurance differs from so many other sectors, it is a statistical product. It is at its core, it's about amalgamating data, analyzing it, and making projections about the future. That is the core product. So you think about how technology has transformed so many different industries, and you get your Uber Eats or whatever, and it gives you some sushi, and no doubt algorithms have been involved, and mobiles have been involved, and GPS has been involved, and all different stuff like that. But the sushi that comes, the piece of salmon that you have there, hasn't been changed by machine learning. And that's true of just about every other sector that you care to think of. Spotify is an incredible company and they use technology fabulously, but Sgt. Pepper hasn't changed since it was recorded in the 1950s. It's the same bits. Insurance is one of the only industries where the core product itself, not only can you change everything around the product, the distribution, the user experience, but the core product is susceptible to transformation through machine learning and data. So we identified at the outset that even before you get to LLMs, just deep learning, machine learning, modern disciplines of how you aggregate data and how you utilize data in order to make projections would be transformative to the very core of insurance. And in the early days, I used to say about kind of the incumbents, they paid us the backhanded compliment of saying, hey, these guys have a neat app and they're good at PR. And that was true. We had a neat app and we were good at PR. But what they failed to understand is that neat app was generating about 100-fold more data than the agents or broker-based distribution methods were. And that was all going into a single proprietary system that could analyze all of that data in really profound ways. Ajit Jain from Berkshire Hathaway, who runs the insurance operation for Warren Buffett, recently said that they have 500 at Geico. They own Geico. They said 500, and then he corrected himself. He said over 600 systems that don't talk to one another. So you can't possibly do the kind of thing that we're doing if you're in such a distributed environment, built up your systems higgledy-pickledy through acquisition and everything else. So we just understood that at its core, insurance is a statistical product. If you do data right, if you do machine learning right, you'll be able to enjoy an advantage in the plumbing, in the very core of insurance, let alone in all the distribution and the marketing and the direct to consumer.
Yeah, so you take a ton of costs out, and obviously the brokers is a big part of that. But let's talk about like underwriting, because it sounds like this is when you're talking about all that data and how you use it and how you obviously differentiate yourself from the incumbents. I have to assume that underwriting and the efficiency or in the and the quality of that is probably something that really differentiates you guys.
Absolutely, and particularly in the last couple of years, there is a deep debt that you have to pay when you enter this space, kind of the school of hard knocks, because you can build the software, that's cool. Anybody can build the software if they're good enough at that. But what you don't have is all the data that you need in order to assess risk. Car policies, home policies, only about 6% of customers make a claim in a given year. If you want to find the multivariate correlates between all different signals and different claims to be able to make predictions, you need millions of policies sold, and you need to allow several years for all that data to populate all of your data charts, and then you can start making predictions. A couple of years ago, our loss ratio, which is a measure of how good we're doing on this, started dropping, and it's been dropping like a stone. We've had like 7 or 8 quarters of precipitous declines, the likes of which the industry really doesn't know. Particularly given that we've been accelerating our growth concurrently. So we reported last quarter, our 7th consecutive quarter of accelerating growth, a 7th consecutive quarter of declining loss ratios. And that X shape doesn't exist in insurance. This is a sector that says if it grows like a weed, it probably is, because if you grow too fast on a human substrate, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to oversell, you're going to miss things, and therefore your quality is going to decline. If you are on a digital substrate, on an AI substrate, the more selling you do, the more data you populate, the faster your learning and your feedback loops close, and therefore you get better and better. So this concurrent acceleration of growth, acceleration of results, profitability, all the while not growing our OPEX at all, which talks to the LLM side of the house, which is that we've added 1 million customers while decreasing our headcount.
Wow.
So all of that comes together. That tells you something about the AI story.
That's the loss ratio thing, and just growing, basically all your operating metrics without adding costs is something I keep hearing. I interviewed, it was a publicly traded fintech CEO just a couple of weeks ago, said almost exactly the same thing. And you have the data, you can just see it. And that's the thing that I think, as so many investors in the public markets are focused on, who are the picks and the shovels, and who's going to benefit or who has benefited and who will continue to benefit until there are use cases of outside of tech, let's call it, because you could make the argument, make it is the argument that, insurance companies are outside of tech, but you approach this industry with a tech first sort of thing. That's yet to happen in so many different industries. There's thousands of companies just here in the US that we probably all know the brand names who have yet to do the things that you're already demonstrating. And obviously the fact that fintech is the fin and the tech, that makes perfect sense. Just let's talk about, you just mentioned a couple of the categories. What are some of the biggest categories? What did you go after first? Was it homeowners and rental? And it sounds like you guys are moving into auto, which is obviously massive too. So how did you think about the different verticals and where do you think the biggest opportunities are right now?
Yeah, and then I want to comment on your picks and shovels if I can as well. We started with homeowners, really renters, although from day one we sold some homeowners policies as well. And then we've started layering on policies. And our idea has always been to acquire consumers young, when incumbents want them least, identify risks who are going to be fabulous risks, but they're just not rich yet, and they don't have all the credit scores yet, and they don't have 5 years driving history yet, but you know that these are going to be fabulous risks, and Chubb is going to want them in 10 years' time, but guess what? There'll be satisfied Lemonade customers by then. So our 70%, we're approaching 3 million customers in the US at the moment. 70% of them are under 35. We are, rather than doing what the rest of the industry does, which is bombard you with ads of saying, I switched and I saved, we're acquiring customers straight off we're picking the fruit from the tree. We're going to the orchard and they're coming to us first. This is the first policy they're buying, and then they're growing with us. So renters is a classic entry point for us. But 50% of our car policies are being sold to existing customers. And that is such an expensive customer acquisition segment. Geico pays a fortune to acquire customers. For us, 50% of our customers are coming to us at negative CAC. We acquired them for an insurance policy that's cheap and cheerful like renters. That's profitable. So they've paid for themselves, and then they buy a car policy without us having to spend another
And the
dime.
LTV is just shooting higher.
LTV shoots. You look at what happens to a good a risk between the age of, say, 20 or 25 and 30 or 35, their net worth goes up tenfold. Yeah. Their responsibilities increase. Insurance tracks to that. So all you have to do really is not disappoint your customers, acquire them well. And if you have a long-term approach, you'll build something of enduring value.
Well, I have to assume that at your analyst meetings and such, you're being asked, like, what else can you apply this model to that is adjacent? Because when you have that sort of CAC situation that you're talking about, I mean, you just see a lot of other opportunities. And when you think about the model and the infrastructure that you built, it probably lends itself. I know you're going to say, we're just focused on the industry that we're here and we have geographic opportunities, that sort of thing. Before we get to the picks and shovels, geographic expansion, how are you thinking about it?
We're there. So we now sell in Europe. We've got a pan-European license. We own our own insurance companies. We are vertically integrated. We do the whole thing nuts to bolts ourselves. We don't buy software from third parties. We don't take licenses from third parties. So our reliance on the incumbency are limited or non-existent. So in the US, we own 2 insurance companies. We have our own reinsurance company in the Cayman Island. And in Europe, some years ago, we established our own pan-European insurance company. We're based out of the Netherlands. And we sell in Germany, France, Netherlands, and the UK. And that's actually growing significantly faster even than our US operation, which is fast growing in and of itself. So we do that. And this ties back to one of the things you were talking about earlier with the digital first. Insurance companies don't do that. Any insurance brand that you can think of in the US, State Farm, Allstate, Farmers, anything with the name State and Farm in it, they all stop at the water's edge. You go to the UK, they've never heard of them. You go to France, they've never heard of them. And then you think of the big French European, the Allianz or the AXA or Admiral. Those are names that are non-existent here. For whatever reason, insurance companies don't cross the Atlantic very successfully. And we had a hypothesis early on, which is that the customer that we're targeting in Berlin or in San Francisco or in London have more in common with each other than they do with their host city, almost, if you like. It's young digital-first consumers. And they all use Spotify, and they all use Uber, and they all use, it can go down the list. Netflix, why wouldn't they all use the same insurance company? So we did that. And because of our digital infrastructure, we don't need to roll into town and build a skyscraper and populate it with 1,000 people. We have no employees in Germany. We have like 1 or 2 in France. We're able to open entire countries without placing much by way of headcount there. So just the leverage, the operational leverage is so powerful that it's worth a shot. As it happens, the shot is working out. But easier than doing all the market research was just launch the country and see how that plays out.
Well, you just mentioned a reinsurance company that you own. Like, let's talk about reinsurance for a second, because this is something, you think back to over the last 20 years, when you have financial market or economic palpitations, this is something that people drill down on a little bit. How do you think about this? Because obviously there's lots of levers to pull either way as far as on the reinsurance front.
Sure. I mentioned that we're vertically integrated. We own our own insurance companies. We're regulated by the toughest regulators in the world. Our domiciled regulator is New York City, and the financial department of New York City is regarded as one of the most demanding regulators in the world. It was intentional that we came here first and foremost to get our licenses, thinking that if you can pass muster with the most exacting regulator, others will allow you to move to their states, and we will be able to assure people or reassure people, investors, customers, that we're for real, we're legit, they don't have to worry. We did something similar in Europe. The Dutch regulators are very exacting and demanding. So we've always taken our financial responsibilities extremely seriously, always made sure that we're very well capitalized and have no concerns. And reinsurance has been a part of that. So from day one, Hannover Re, the second largest reinsurance company in the world, has been one of our backers. They still are today. Swiss Re and other major reinsurance companies that have signed up to backfill us. We have never needed it. We've got all the capital that we need. But just to give peace of mind to everybody else, we've got some of the biggest and deepest pockets in the world backstopping our policies.
All right, so let's talk about some of the recent, and we're not looking forward that you guys are going to report in a few weeks or so, but just, you're seeing, I'm just looking at my FactSet machine here. In the Q2, revenue growth was 35% year over year. I think you guided that for the full year here. So you might be a bit over $700 million in revenue this year, expected to be north of 1.2 billion next year. It looks like losses are declining year over year. Let's just speak to those things, because if you're sitting in my seat and I hear everything that you're saying, I see like just nothing but opportunity, not just here to cross-sell, to get more efficient, but then obviously expand geographically, which you are doing. Like, let's talk about that revenue growth. Where is it coming from? Why is it accelerating? And then like, does that, your path to profitability, is it on that similar kind of trajectory?
It is. So our revenue has been growing. There's a metric that we prefer to revenue, which is premiums, in-force premiums and premiums, just because of the reinsurance piece. When you use the kind of reinsurance we use, that is deducted from revenue. So if anything, our revenue number is understating the size of our business. Our business is even larger than the revenue number would suggest for GAAP accounting reasons. Not that it matters all that much, but the trend line is exactly as you're describing it. We're already cash flow positive. We said we'd be cash flow positive in 2025. We ended up beating it by a year. 2024 turned out to be a cash flow positive year. We'll be cash flow positive again this year. So in terms of just the viability of the product, of the system, the product, the technology, the long-term survivability of the business, I think all of those questions which perhaps plagued us 3 or 4 or 5 years ago have been resolved favorably. We're generating cash. We're not consuming cash, which is a big deal. The way GAAP accounting works in insurance, GAAP profitability usually follows cash flow. It's somewhat unusual, but for various reasons, it's the way it works in insurance. And we'll be GAAP EBITDA positive. We've guided to the end of next year, so late 2026. And the trajectory is exactly what you said. We see ourselves growing the business. It's organic. It's proper growth. It's more customers who are paying us more for more policies. So all of the things that you would want to see driving growth are driving growth. We're just getting more and more customers. Word of mouth is helping us. Brand recognition continues to spread. Side by side with that, our underwriting improves for reasons that we discuss. And what that does to gross profit is just mind-blowing. We almost trebled our gross profit last quarter. So 35% growth of revenue, but we did almost a 3x growth of our gross profit because the revenue is growing, but the margins grew to the high 30s, which in an insurance company is highly unusual. So all of those things coming together means that we're increasingly bullish and confident on what we're able to pull off in the medium term, in the next year or two. But really our focus is on the long term. We think that this can continue. We don't see an end in sight. You mentioned before, would we look at other industries? I've got no principled objection to that, but also no need. Insurance is so vast. We have so much headroom. We could 10x our business. We could 10x it again, and we wouldn't be the largest insurance company in the U.S.
So are the largest insurance companies in the U.S., are they like looking at you guys and saying, listen, we better keep an eye on this, or we're going to wake up in 5 more years and like we're literally going to be, dinosaurs within this industry that we basically have created and lorded over, especially, I mean, does that make sense? Because, like what you just said, said, in technology, you see it again and again. I mean, companies that are not willing to kind of disrupt themselves will ultimately just get disrupted. And when you think about the scope of this industry, it just seems like you could kind of keep going and going. And the leverage that you have in your model gives you the opportunity to do that in a fashion that most businesses that are just kind of, like they're people oriented. I mean, think about these insurance guys. I mean, how many millions of people do they employ just to kind of get to write these policies?
I don't know what's going on their boards, and I don't know what happened back in the day, but in my mind's eye, back in 1995, somebody was sitting around one of the big retailers and saying, hey, have you guys come across this thing, Amazon?
Yeah.
And like, oh, it's a website. Hey, Jim, you know HTML, you build us a website. And there was a profound misunderstanding of the depth of the difference of building a company on a technology substrate versus on a human substrate, and how the differences don't collapse over time, they compound over time. And Amazon is much more different today than a retailer than they were back in 1995. And yet retail hasn't disappeared. So I think something similar may well happen in insurance, which is if you had a chance to invest in Lemonade or Geico or Progressive or whatever, you'll be happy in retrospect that you chose Lemonade versus anybody else. But I don't think that they're going anywhere anytime soon. Mm-hmm. They are richer than God. They have tens of millions of customers, many of whom don't want to change policy. They're set in their ways. So I'm not anticipating their demise, not even their decline.
Yeah.
We can grow. I spend very little time focused on our competitors, not out of disrespect, but just out of a recognition that we determine our own success. This is such a vast industry that we could grow so fast for so long without disturbing anybody else. Mm-hmm. That just has to be our focus. Focus on the customer, sell them the best policy, sell them another one, rather than thinking too much about the competitors.
We just went through all of the different ways that you run the business where AI benefits it, differentiates you from the incumbents and the like. Now it seems that the large hyperscalers, because of a model, 3 years ago that came out, all of the ones who provide cloud infrastructure, they're like, this is going to be it. Not just for consumers, but every sort of business in the world is going to need this technology. Not too different than, again, a lot of the folks in the late 90s said the internet is going to change every sort of industry. But here we are now. In the last 3 years, we probably had $1 trillion of cumulative spend on infrastructure. NVIDIA was a company that I think had they booked like hundreds of billions of dollars in revenues. The company is a $4.5 trillion market cap. I think it was like $300 billion 3.5 years ago. We've never seen anything like this, okay? But right now, a lot of the benefits have been accrued to, let's call it, 50 names globally, whether in the public and private markets. How does this, you're sitting here and you built this company 10 years ago and you had no expectation that all of this was going to be built. So how are you thinking about it now? And what does that mean for you? I have to assume this is going to be like a jetpack or an accelerant for you guys.
That's exactly right. We love it. Whether or not the investors putting those trillions of dollars are going to make a return on investment, I don't know. Not my place to say.
Does it matter to you at all? Misallocation of resources
They're
by all these folks?
subsidizing my business.
Okay.
I think this is obviously self-serving, but this is honestly also how I think about these things. You're not going to find alpha in NVIDIA. Not anymore. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But you've got to start thinking, I'm getting nervous about all this spend and Azure and everybody spending these gazillions of dollars. It's going to generate a ton of intelligence. What is that intelligence going to do in the world? Who's going to consume it? How is it going to be harnessed in order to do cool stuff in the world? And I'm thrilled that it's being built out there and that it's being built out at a scale that I can then afford to consume it because it's marginally almost free to me to use. But the real question is, how do you take all of that intelligence and affect real industries and real change? And if you were going through that thought process as an investor, saying, all of this, what good is it going to do? What transformation is it going to do? And then you say, what is the biggest industry in the world that could be transformed by it? You'd come to insurance very quickly.
Yeah.
It's bigger than pharma. It's bigger than defense. It's bigger than oil. It's bigger than chips. It's bigger than SaaS. It is crazy bigger than Hollywood, bigger than any industry, bigger than agriculture. It's crazy big. If you went through the list, you'd hit insurance very much on the top of it. And then if you ask yourself the question, insurance is a statistical product, nothing physical. It's all about intelligence and data. It's born to be disruptive. It is perhaps the most disruptible industry in the world. Who's the number one player best placed to take all of that AI and disrupt this huge industry? And I think in fairness, you'd come to that answer, Lemonade, very, very quickly. There aren't that many of us around. So I think from an investor point of view, the logical steps kind of almost play themselves out. And for us, this is exactly as you described it. I like to liken it to a walkway in the airport. So, you're walking down the long corridors, and if you see this old dear with her little bag, and you're like, should I go on the walkway? She might slow me down. And you're making that kind of calculation, and the walkway moves at 1.5 miles an hour, so who cares? But if you got on that walkway and it was accelerating indefinitely, and it was 100 miles long rather than 100 meters long, whether or not you were on the walkway makes all the difference in the world. We're on the walkway, the rest of the insurance companies aren't. And what I mean by that is that when GPT-5 drops, the next day, I know how much more efficient our systems have become because we've just powered it, injected it with more intelligence than it had the day before. And all of our metrics improve overnight. That's what being AI first means at the moment. It means that your business is built atop of AI, and as AI rises, it raises your business and everything gets better. Your automation metrics, everything gets better. That's the way our business is built. I'm not aware of any other insurance company that's built that way. And that's why all of these investments ultimately, from our narrow perspective, manifest as just a better Lemonade, cheaper policies, bigger market share, more profitability.
Right. And a lot of other competitors, whether they're within insurance or like similar sort of business models in other industries, I mean, if they're starting now, if they are Johnny-come-latelys, if they're trying to tell a story, it's going to just that much more expensive for them to kind of like, capture the resources necessary, right? Because there's a lot of demand for them right now. And I think your point about they're basically subsidizing your business to some degree, and I think that puts you in a very different spot. I'm just curious because I look around, and a lot of people, when they think about the public markets and they think of the valuations of, let's just say, the S&P 500, and they think about how much this CapEx spend is driving earnings growth, it's driving performance in the major indices. It's going to be, we're going to see multiple expansion because we're going to see strategists and analysts start to say, well, if the financial industry can do this, that, and the other thing with AI, they're going to take this cost out. It's going to increase earnings this much and margin, and we're going to get a 25 multiple in the S&P 500, which has never been sustainable. But that's the sort of thing where if you're really going to be able to call a market a bubble, you're going to have to see those like crazy sorts of things. And so I say to you, you're already getting the return on these investments. These are investments you made long before GPT, right? And GPT, let's be clear, is a consumer-facing product. So now we have to, for the rubber to hit the road, to justify these spends going out to 2030, and these are the numbers. So like from a revenue standpoint, you're going to have to see a lot of other companies in a lot of different industries use this technology to do what you guys have done. What do you think the chances, and I hate to put out 2030, that we're going to look back and say, oh yeah, that $3 trillion build, and they kept on saying we needed X amount of trillions of dollars in revenue to justify. What do you think? Do you think we're going to be there in 2030?
I'm not comfortable answering that. I understand the dilemma. There's so much speculation. I think if you think about all possible futures, a fair amount of that space is taken up by the answer yes.
Yeah.
But I can't be
But
definitive.
your point is 2030. Yeah. And my point about all this, whether it's 35 or 40, it'll eventually happen.
That
you know
what
what I mean?
100%.
Yeah.
That
I mean, that's
100%.
been kind of my view is like in my lifetime, I'm 53 years old. Almost every single, piece of tech that we've seen in sci-fi or this, it's all happened for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, supercomputer on your wrist. We used to say that about our flip phones and then it was our mobile. It's all going to happen. But I guess when it comes to markets and it comes to capital, it's about the allocation of that capital to useful sort of endeavors, and that's how people invest in things. And so I don't mean to, I just think when I look at a company like yours, this was built for this. You don't have to make that justification in 5 years from now.
We were built for this moment. But I'll tell you more than that. I spend a lot of time thinking about beyond Lemonade, just how transformative this is for our children, for our grandchildren, what this is going to do for the world, what this is going to do for employment. The fact that at our company, we're able to grow so dramatically while shrinking our headcount. As a CEO, I'm all for that, and as a technologist, I'm excited by it. But as a citizen and a father, etc., it's something that raises questions and concerns, which I spend some of my time trying to contend with as well. But I have no doubt that whether it's 2030 or 2035, every intellectual endeavor that is financially worthwhile will be able to be done by AI.
Yeah.
I think we're almost there today. I think GPT-5 Pro can do almost every job we have to get done at Lemonade. People think that it's just the model. You have to build out the scaffolding. You have to create the correct context. You just take a smart human and stick them in Lemonade. They won't be very productive unless you build the tools and give them the access and give them the training. But I don't think we've got any big leaps that we need to make in order for AI to be able to displace a lot of human labor. I just think we need some good old-fashioned software build out in order to make it as powerful as it already can be today. And we know that GPT-6 isn't far behind, and 7 will follow that, and 8. But even if that weren't true, and I have no question in my mind that it is true, already today we've passed a threshold that just enables so much of human labor to be automated.
Yeah, and again, it seems like that's a benefit. The fewer folks that you have selling your product, the more the engineers you can have, powering it to become better. What would the thing, again, this is a publicly traded company, and I know you get a lot of hard questions from investors. I know there's a whole sorts of cynical investors out there, or analysts, or strategists, that sort of thing. I mean, what are some of the things that, kind of keep you up at night? What are the sorts of tape bombs that, we could see, coming across in the morning? They say, you know what, I got to make sure I protect that flank. Because again, I started in the business, and I was taught this very early. For every really bullish case you want to make, whether it's about a stock or an asset class, you better know how it goes pear-shaped. So what are some of the things that keep you up at night?
This will sound trite, but I sleep really well at night. And that doesn't mean that there aren't threats looming, but I will tell you that they're not well defined. Mm-hmm. There were stages in our business. Would we get licensed by New York? Will we get reinsurance from the players that we needed? Will consumers want to buy from a company that they've never heard of before with a juvenile name and a pink logo? There were loads of questions that were existential threats to us, and we needed to kind of answer those questions in order to get to where we're at. And maybe you flip that coin 10 times and only once comes up heads, and we were lucky. I'm not sure that there wasn't a lot of luck at play. You ask me now about the contours of the things that threaten us, and they are much harder to identify. Things seem to be going well. The metrics seem to be moving in the right direction. The wind is in our sails, and we're feeling the acceleration, we're feeling the improvement. The whole AI moment, as you say, we were born for it, so this is a wave that we're really riding well, to kind of mix my metaphors. So I'm sure that there are lurking threats, but I have to say that they haven't revealed themselves yet.
All right, last question, and I'm sure this is on the minds of every listener here. You sit there and you watch NFL Sunday, okay? And like Bill over here, he starts with the game in London and doesn't turn it off until 11:30 p.m. when the Sunday night gets done. There's probably like 300 insurance commercials by 10 different companies, and all the geckos and the mayhem. I mean, it goes on. Jake from Stan. Where do these guys have all this money to spend? I don't understand it. Do you have any data about how much is spent on an annual basis here in the U.S.? And why is it literally in any given hour you can see commercials from 5 different companies?
From 5 different companies. You can't tell them apart. You don't even remember who you bought your policy from. They have to use the mayhem and the geckos because without a gimmick, they're all interchangeable. Similar logo, similar messages. I switched and I saved, and it could be, that could have been Liberty Mutual, it could have been Geico, it could have been absolutely anybody.
The Geico though, I mean, it's an all time. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm going to them to have a policy written. It's just
they're a great company. Yeah. They're an absolutely great company, but they invest something in the order of $2 billion a year behind you knowing what their gecko is and giving them a nice Cockney accent, and that is the gimmick, because the policies are they're ostensibly identical to each other. This is a commodity product, so you end up having to spend absolute fortunes. But it goes back to my comment at the top of the conversation. This is staggeringly big business. 11% of GDP. Americans spend over $300 billion a year just on car insurance. Yeah. So this is huge money. And yes, all of those guys are fighting over the same few customers who are rotating every few years, changing. Lemonade was born to do something profoundly different, to give you a policy in as little as 3 seconds, to pay your claim rather in as little as 3 seconds. It takes on average 90 seconds to buy a policy with us. You don't need to speak to a broker. Getting your latte made at Starbucks takes about twice as long as getting your policy sold to you by Lemonade. So radically different user experience, everything direct to consumer, better costs, lower premiums, and better experience. So we're trying to differentiate ourselves in ways that go way beyond using a Cockney accent or some gimmick or another.
I dig them. I'm not going there for insurance. All right, this is the very last thing. Promises. I promise you, because I know you got to go, and I appreciate you being here.
Well, good.
Would you say that every dollar in your revenue base, okay, is AI related? Like you could say this is our revenue base, 100% AI associated.
Close enough. We spend a lot on advertising ourselves. Yeah. Close to 90% of our dollar allocations is done by AI. Mm-hmm. every customer that comes to us with an app or our website, as soon as you come there looking for a policy, we have 50 different AI models making predictions about you. Will you churn? Will you buy? Will you claim? Will you cross-sell another policy? They use all of those predictions to decide what your lifetime value would be, discount it for the time value of money, and put a dollar amount. And then that is that one campaign that brought us that one consumer. But we have ostensibly algo trading going on where all the different campaigns and all the different territories with all the different products are competing with one another, and something like 90% of our spend is being allocated that way by AI making predictions about each campaign, each product, each territory. There's no insurance company in the world that does that. So right from the get-go, before we've even met you, we're using AI in order to decide where to spend our incremental dollar, to assess what kind of valuable customer you come in. Then, of course, the onboarding is all done by chatbots. The policy is sold and served to you by chatbots. And the majority of our claims never have a human in the loop at all. Now, these are complicated things to do. You've just been burgled, or you've had a fire in your house, or your pet has cancer, or all different awful things with long vet reports or assessors or police reports. The AI churns through that stuff, and most of our claims are paid without any human in the loop at all. So you look at our life cycle, and you'd have to say, at first approximation, the answer to your question is yes.
Right. The reason I asked that question, and I know it's apples to oranges. At me if you want. I'm not on the socials here, people. But Palantir, okay, is in a company that's expected to have like $4.3 billion in sales, maybe $5.5 billion next year. It trades at 100 times sales. And I think if we were to ask Dr. Karp, what percent of your revenues is AI first? You know what I'm saying? Now, he will tell you that I'm sure we're all going to be migrating this, that, whatever, you know what I mean, towards AI. You just laid out how AI touches every single part of your business. And so what I think as an investor, I look at a company like this that is a $430 billion market cap on a $4.5 billion revenue run rate. And I say, I've never seen anything like this. We may never see anything like this again. And then I look at a company like yours, and I've had the opportunity now to sit down with you twice, and I'm looking at this and I say to myself, there's massive disconnects in this market. And I'm not just here to push it. I don't have a position in the stock. My good friend Steve does, and he has been in there. So that's not what I'm here for. What I'm here to is try to find out what companies are using this technology, what is real, and what's investable if you're thinking about it longer term. So that's that's my bow I want to put on this. How's that? Is that fair?
Fair. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yes,
I agree with you.
Yes, thank you. All right, Daniel Schreiber, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you'll come back and we'll do it again.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dan.